Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're exploring the life of a guy whose name is practically synonymous with artistic genius. Look, we usually just picture Claude Monet as the painter of those beautiful, tranquil water lilies, right? But his actual story? It is this heroic 86-year battle against rigid rules, terrible physical ailments, and crushing personal tragedy. So let's look at how his absolute obsession with capturing transient light literally changed the way we see the world. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. First, the rebel painter. Then, birth of Impressionism, followed by tragedy and new horizons. After that, we've got chasing the light, and finally, the master of Giverny.
Chapter 1. The Rebel Painter, Rejecting the Establishment. To really understand Monet's vision, we absolutely have to start with his defiance.
So, as a young guy in Le Havre, Monet was, well, he was a pretty apathetic student. He actually made money drawing caricatures instead of paying attention in class. His dad desperately wanted him to join the family's grocery business, but Monet was having none of it. He actively defied that path. By 1859, he's off studying art in Paris, but totally on his own terms. And you can really see this restless nature in 1861 when he was drafted into the army. Get this, his family actually offered to buy him out of conscription if he just agreed to become a quote-unquote normal, traditional artist. But Monet? He chose the army in Algeria instead. He later said that the incredibly vivid colors of North Africa planted the seed for his entire artistic future. Then, when he returned to France to recover from typhoid fever, a completely pivotal relationship was cemented. He met fellow artist Eugene Boudin. Now, Boudin introduced Monet to this concept of en plein air, or outdoor painting. And guys, this was a massive paradigm shift. Think about how radical it was back then to just abandon the dark, dusty, traditional art studio and thrust yourself directly out into the unpredictable elements. It was a total game changer. Monet actually later admitted that Boudin was the master to whom he owed absolutely everything. But as you might guess, taking his easel outside didn't exactly bring immediate glory. In fact, Monet's early career was defined by immense, crushing struggle and official discouragement. He was repeatedly rejected by the traditional Paris salon, which was literally the absolute gatekeeper of artistic success at the time. It is wildly ironic to think that the creator of some of the most expensive paintings in the world today once faced such severe financial ruin. He literally had his early canvases seized by creditors. He was forced to rely entirely on this tiny circle of patrons just to survive. Chapter 2, Birth of Impressionism, Defying the Art World. You see, those early rejections didn't break Monet. Actually, they pushed him to spark a total visual revolution. In 1870, Monet fled to London to avoid the Franco-Prussian War, and this self-imposed exile, it was absolutely crucial. While there, he became completely mesmerized by J.M.W. Turner's atmospheric paintings of the Thames fog. It was also in London that he met art dealer Paul Durand-Ruel, the man who would eventually become his commercial champion. Returning to France and completely over the rigid Parisian establishment, Monet joined forces with artists like Renoir, Pissarro, and Degas. Together, they formed a rogue independent art society so they could bypass the gatekeepers and take their work directly to the public. Now, here's a really fun fact. The word Impressionism itself was originally meant as an insult. Yeah, at their first independent exhibition in 1874, Monet displayed this hazy, atmospheric painting of the Le Havre port, titled Impression Sunrise. Well, a hostile art critic named Louis Leroy wrote a scathing review, totally mocking it as a mere impression. He was basically implying it was nothing more than an unfinished amateur sketch, just a quick doodle. Yet that insult somehow became the badge of honor for an entire movement. Roughly 3,500 people attended this rogue exhibition. By charging a 60-franc entrance fee and completely bypassing the official salon jury, these artists fundamentally broke the rigid rules of the Parisian art establishment. They threw out the dark, dramatic, romantic lighting and swapped it for pale tones and these beautiful, transient, everyday moments. Chapter 3. Tragedy and New Horizons. While his art was becoming revolutionary, Monet's personal life was about to enter its absolute darkest period. By 1878, Monet, his wife Camille, and their 2 kids had moved to the village of Vittel. They were completely broke, constantly facing the very real threat of losing their home. But the true devastation hit in 1879. His beloved wife Camille died from uterine cancer. She was only 32 years old.
Monet's grief was incredibly profound, and you can see it in his work. His color palette during this era darkened significantly, perfectly matching the harsh, bleak weather of the landscapes he was painting at the time.
In the depths of this grief, Monet actually painted a study of Camille on her deathbed. Years later, he made this heartbreaking confession to a friend. He said, "I one day found myself looking at my beloved wife's dead face and just systematically noting the colors according to an automatic reflex." I mean, wow. That reveals the sheer magnitude of his obsession, doesn't it? Even in his absolute most agonizing personal moment, staring at his deceased wife, his artist's brain literally could not stop analyzing the shifting tones and colors of the physical world.
So, this brings us to a really pivotal question. How exactly does a grieving, bankrupt artist, someone who is pushed to the absolute brink of despair, reinvent himself? Chapter 4, Chasing the Light. Well, the answer to that question was movement, a relentless, incredibly prolific pursuit of nature.
Feeling completely dissatisfied with standard Impressionism, Monet just began to travel obsessively. He worked alone, desperate to capture transient light across all sorts of varying climates. And this brilliantly illustrates his drive. He went everywhere, from the exotic, lush palm trees of Bordighera, Italy in 1884 to the vibrant tulip fields of the Netherlands, and eventually all the way to the enchanting waterways and architecture of Venice.
To truly understand just how dedicated he was to his craft during these travels, I want you to consider the number of 41. That is exactly how many times Monet painted Waterloo Bridge alone during his stays in London. 41 times.
His overall London output was absolutely staggering. We're talking Waterloo Bridge 41 times, Charing Cross 34 times, and Parliament 19 times. He would set up at the Savoy Hotel or St. Thomas Hospital, and he just painted at sunrise, noon, and dusk, constantly chasing the magnificent breath of the shifting London fog. And he wouldn't just leave them as they were. He'd take these canvases all the way back to his studio in France, painstakingly reworking them for years just to achieve absolute perfection. And you know what? This relentless output finally paid off big time. His dealer, Paul Durand-Ruel, found immense commercial success selling Monet's work over in the United States. Almost overnight, the decades of crushing debt and begging for loans just vanished. This newfound wealth and security provided Monet with the exact resources he needed for what would become his ultimate final masterpiece. Chapter 5, The Master of Giverny. For the final chapter of his life, Monet actually stops traveling altogether. He becomes intensely localized, cultivating his ultimate canvas. Back in 1883, Monet rented and eventually purchased a home in Giverny, up in northern France. And with his growing wealth, he didn't just paint nature anymore. He engineered it. He literally acted as the architect of his own world. He bought up extra land, diverted an entire stream, and built a massive water garden. He was importing exotic cultivars from South America and Egypt, and eventually he employed an astonishing 7 gardeners to sculpt the environment. All of this so he could have absolute, obsessive control over the light, the water, and his subjects. The result of this incredible, curated garden was a series of over 250 paintings of his water lilies. 250! This single motif occupied him continually for the last 20 years of his life. It was definitely his most ambitious sequence, with easels set up all around the pond so he could seamlessly capture every conceivable angle and reflection. So the crucial point here is what happened as he aged. As Monet painted these final masterworks, cataracts were drastically failing his physical sight. His perception of color seriously suffered. But here is the incredible contrast. While his physical reality deteriorated to the point of him only seeing these large, blurry masses, his artistic output became more brilliant and imaginative than ever. He had to completely rely on memory and his internal vision to dictate his brushstrokes. By the mid-1910s, because of this failing eyesight combined with a whole lifetime of mastering color, Monet's style became incredibly fluid and audacious. The water lily pond wasn't just a pond anymore. It became a point of departure into something entirely new. Why does this matter to you and me today? Well, because Monet wasn't just painting flowers at the end of his life. By abstracting these forms into pure color and light, he was effectively paving the way for the entirety of modernism. Which leaves us with this final thought. For an artist who spent 86 years fiercely observing the outside world, his greatest, most revolutionary works were ultimately created when his physical eyes failed him and he had to rely entirely on his memory. Does true vision come from what we see in the world or what we hold in our minds? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer on the incredible evolving vision of Claude Monet. Keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.